Does the West hate Arabs and Islam? Well, take a look.
Do you think Islam is at war with the West?
I think Islam hates us.
Barbarism.
Inhuman animals.
From a faraway place, it's barbaric, but hey, it's home.
But why is the motherlode of bad ideas? So yeah, it's not so subtle. The sentiment of hate and superiority over Arabs and Islam runs deep in the West. Every headline, every slur, every war in the Middle East echoes an old script that sets up an eternal clash of civilizations. But where did it all come from? For the longest time, I thought it might be the product of the war on terror, or the legacy of Western colonialism. I was wrong. I was shocked to find out that the West's fear and fantasy of the Arab enemy is not only centuries old, it's been over a millennia in the making. And the consequences, well, they never ended. We are still living in a story that was written long ago, that decides who to fear, who to fight, and who to think we are. Awake, Salah ad-Din, we have returned. My presence here consecrates the victory of the cross over the crescent. A French general proclaimed this while standing in front of Salah ad-Din's grave after his army just conquered Damascus in 1920, at a time when French and British colonialism was sweeping the region. He was referencing the Crusades, Christian religious wars launched from medieval Europe aimed at conquering land from Arab and Muslim rule. But why did a French general see himself as a continuation of Crusader legacy centuries later? The sentiment of hate and superiority against Arabs and Muslims traces back its roots to the Middle Ages, because that's where our story begins. The Arab Empire began in 633 and expanded across the remnants of the Roman Empire into North Africa, Spain, and eventually up to France. It reached its height in 711 and was the largest empire to date, but for some reason, it is often a forgotten part of history.
The Arabs created an empire that most people don't refer to, don't talk about, that's basically been deleted from history. It's the Arab Empire, although I have frequently heard it referred to as the Muslim Empire. The reason you need to not do that and call it the Arab Empire is the Arab Empire was created by Arabs, like the Roman Empire was created by Romans. We don't call it the pagan empire, and when it becomes Christian, we don't call it the Christian empire. Is the reason we usually don't even name it, and if we do, we sometimes call it the Muslim Empire, is because of anti-Arab hate. We have that running through the core of our society, the core of our civilization, and one of the reasons is because of the events that led to the Crusades and the Crusades themselves.
See, Arabs back then were referred to as Saracens, a term coined by the Greeks to describe the supposedly savage inhabitants of Arabia. But the Saracens were unknown to medieval Europe. But with the rise of the Arab Empire and Islam that came with it, Europeans sought to understand it through their own biblical and Christian frameworks. At first, they saw these invaders as a scourge sent by God to punish his wayward flock, God's wrath for Christian sin. But this started to change when conversions from Christianity to Islam started to grow at an alarming rate. To justify it, a mythology was born of barbaric violence and conversions by the sword. It was the only way for them to make sense of what was happening. See, we are familiar with the derivative of this narrative today, the plot to convert Western civilization to Islam through Sharia law.
I look at London and it's been so changed, so changed. Now they want to go to Sharia law, but you're in a different country. You can't do that. Both the immigration and their suicidal energy ideas will be the death of Western Europe if something is not done immediately. This cannot be sustained.
You know that conquest is an Islamic value. To submit is literally what Islam means, to make those submit. We've had imams in England saying they want to mount the West like a woman to be mounted and subdued.
Immigration to Western Europe is, a lot of it is Muslim. It's from North Africa.
Islam comes in, we start seeing a problem.
This myth is false. Come here. In fact, the Arab Empire contained 60% of the world's Christians back then. Christians living under Arab Muslim rule were provided with protected status called the Dhimma because they were regarded as people of the book. The Christian Roman Empire needed to portray these Saracens and their growing power and influence as the enemy, the feared other. For those in the Eastern Mediterranean and in Spain, Islam was portrayed as a heretical derivative of Christianity, a worldly religion crafted by a cunning false prophet, tricking people into following him. These portrayals of the Prophet Muhammad as a deceptive impostor became synonymous with the Saracens, and it eventually led to the stereotype about Arabs being untrustworthy and culturally inclined to lie.
The Arabs lie? Of course they do. That's part of the culture. Part of Islamic culture is to lie.
I have no notion that the Palestinians are telling the truth about how many people are killed.
Whether it's from now, 2002, or 1901, the stereotype hasn't changed. For other Europeans, the Saracens were not understood to be followers of another monotheistic religion. They were simply the latest pagans, a familiar category in a familiar story. Us, the people of Christ, against them, the idol worshippers. So the Saracens became an enemy of God, a people not defined by who they were, but by who Europe needed them to be. Sound familiar? This brings me to the most infamous speech of the Middle Ages. Pope Urban II, at the Council of Clermont in 1095. He described the Saracens as an accursed race, utterly alienated from God, invaders who devastated the land with sword, pillage, and fire, and defiled the altars with their uncleanliness. He calls them heathens and wicked, accusing them of torturing Christians in horrific ways. Notice how the Arab Muslims are described. Killing them became not only permitted, but sacred. His words launched the Crusades, a series of holy wars by Western European Christians between the 11th and 13th centuries, aimed at conquering Jerusalem and the surrounding lands from Arab rule. For nearly 200 years, armies from France, Germany, and England marched into the Middle East, driven by promises of salvation and glory. Even after the Crusader states were long gone, their myths and resentments never truly faded and are still glorified to this day.
الأفلام السينمائية وأقلام الشخص في وسائل الإعلام المرئية والمسموعة والمكتوبة، وكذلك حتى وصل الأمر إلى بعض الألعاب الإلكترونية واللي هي موضوعها الحروب الصليبية.
الخلاصة التاريخية أنها حركة استعمارية إمبريالية استغلت الدين واستغلت اسم الصليب.
But for the Arabs at that time, they were a horrific, murderous campaign. Every accusation lobbed at Arabs and Muslims was actually a confession by Europeans about their own behavior.
From the Arab-Muslim historical accounts, as far as we can tell, this is not a theological clash.
The Muslims who are there are like, who are these crazy Franks?
As historian John Tullen argues, anti-Arab and anti-Muslim narratives were never just prejudice. They were tools used to authorize and justify military action, legal segregation, and repression. A propaganda story, a myth engineered to unify Europe against a common enemy. But the medieval clash didn't end there. Alongside the failure of the Crusades came another failure in the 14th century: missionary campaigns to convert Muslims. Missionaries concluded that the problem was with the people they were trying to convert. Muslims, like the Jews before them, were portrayed as too stubborn, too sensual, too obsessed with the literal world to grasp any spiritual truth. The Arabs were cast as irrational, childlike, intellectually lazy, and incapable of reason, creatures who could not be persuaded, so they must be compelled. The logic was chilling. This idea reinforced the superiority of the Western mind over the backward, uncivilized Oriental, a narrative way too familiar to colonized people today that traces back its legacy to the 1300s.
The unthinkable has happened to them. And this is not a developing third world nation. This is Europe.
Yes, Europe is a garden. We have built a garden. The rest of the world, and you know very well, Federica, is not exactly a garden. The rest of the world, most of the rest of the world, is a jungle.
But this isn't a place, with all due respect, like Iraq or Afghanistan, that has seen conflict raging for decades. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European, I have to choose those words carefully too, city where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen.
The moment that this starts becoming chaotic, like animalistic, we're gone. So you want to know what's happening, act civilized, act kind, act tolerant, because this is the problem with what's happening in the region.
When they say, oh, civilized cities, and in another clip, well-dressed people, and this is not the third world, they really mean white people, don't they?
I just want to take a quick break from the video on why the West hates Arabs and Islam and tell you that episodes like this are only made possible because of our supporters on Patreon. Doing this work takes time, resources, and editorial independence. And we're only able to do it thanks to our community. So, if you believe in what we're doing and want to be part of this with us, you can join our Patreon. It's how we keep this going. Back to the video. This brings me back to 1920 and the French general proclaiming the triumph of the cross over the crescent. Just as propaganda from medieval Europe justified the Crusades, Orientalism in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century justified colonialism and the exploitation of people, land, and resources.
Orientalism described how the West saw the East as inferior, uncivilized, and backwards. This was more about defining Europe as the Orient's opposite, superior, civilized, and advanced. Orientalism was the knowledge that authorizes and justifies the West's domination and subjugation of the East.
From the French mission to civilize, to the British manuals on the government of subject races, the bridge between the Middle Ages and colonialism was built with the same bricks. John Talon describes what came in the Middle Ages as adolescent Orientalism that was at once immature and timeless, that later matured within the context of modern Europe. One of the reasons he cites is that Western authors writing about Muslims, Arabs, Turks, or the Oriental from the 14th century to the 20th referred to the fundamental texts and images created during medieval Europe.
It develops a kind of image of the timeless Orient, as if the Orient, unlike the West, doesn't develop, it stays the same. And that's one of the problems with Orientalism, is it creates an image outside of history, of something that is placid and still and, eternal, which is simply contradicted by the facts of history. You see, so that's in that one sense, it's a creation of you might say an ideal other.
The understanding of the other never evolved, and it was purposefully so. The Arab and Muslim became frozen in time. They existed outside of history in the Western mind.
The whole history of these Orientalist representations, which portrayed the Muslim and the Oriental as, in effect, a lesser breed. In other words, the only thing they understand is the language of force. This is the principle here, that unless you give them a bloody nose, they won't understand. We can't talk reason.
And once again, the violent, childlike, carnal, irrational Saracen was cast in the role of the enemy against the enlightened and superior West. Fast forward to the end of the Cold War and the dawn of the 21st century. The US-led West needed a new boogeyman to replace communism. Enter the terrorists, the extremists, the jihadis, the eternal Saracen. Along the way, literature, music, pop culture, the media, and Hollywood all played their role in reinforcing this story. What was once a civilizing mission became the American freedom by the sword, framed as an epic clash of civilizations.
That we're facing a new kind of enemy, somebody so barbaric. We're a nation of law, a nation of civil right. We haven't seen this kind of barbarism in a long period of time. This crusade, this war on terrorism is going to take a while.
Is there a clash between the Western and the Islamic world?
Well, we want one. We want one.
In order to fight the Great War for civilization?
We want one. Could we do more to provoke it than we are already? Look, as I said before, the Jordanian army is not in Brussels. The Egyptian army is not in Paris. The Libyan army is not in London. The Afghan army is not in... It's the other way round.
But now, the enemy wasn't just over there. It's knocking at the gates. Immigrants who don't understand our way of life. Veils and mosques rising in Western cities. Sharia law whispered in fearful headlines.
You would ban all Muslims? I would temporarily halt Muslim immigration to this country until we get a grip of the problem.
Tommy Robinson's long organised march, titled Unite the Kingdom, was accompanied by a side of religion, some people bringing crosses, others dressing like ancient religious orders.
Yeah, it's a Knights Templar.
If you stand for your freedom, lift your voice and shout!
From the invasion of Iraq to the war on terror, headlines might have changed, but the story stayed the same.
Islam is a useful foreign demon to turn attention away from the inequities and problems in our own society.
And if there's one place where this ancient story is being played out in full view, it's Palestine. How else can so many watch a genocide in Gaza, tens of thousands of children buried under the rubble, and shrug as if history is simply following a script? Because Palestine is a microcosm of the Western narrative about Arabs and Islam, a space where medieval stereotypes, colonial logic, and modern propaganda collide. In much of the Western imagination, Palestinians are framed just as the Saracens were, not as a community with homes, dreams, and rights, but something else, a security threat to be de-radicalized, a barbaric horde that is inherently violent, and as an obstacle of civilization that needs to be ruled by others, because they're incapable of ruling themselves. Meanwhile, Israel has been cast in the role of the enlightened outpost of the West, the only democracy in the Middle East, a frontier that must constantly defend itself from the irrational rage of the native.
Israel as a nation is a place worth defending. Israel as a place with sovereignty and borders, and Israel shines a lot brighter when you contrast it with the barbarism of its neighbors.
Gaza should be understood as a stain on our collective humanity, but it's also something else. It has been the stage where a 1,000-year-old story has played out to justify modern violence and genocide, where the Saracen once again becomes the enemy, where the same ancient lie tells us who deserves empathy and who deserves to be erased. So does the West hate Arabs and Islam? Well, yes, because it's been engineered to for more than 1,300 years. The hate wasn't born from a misunderstanding. It was manufactured. It was preached from the pulpits, painted on maps, codified into law, and broadcast into living rooms. A lie repeated long enough that it became a worldview, and that worldview created a villain that the West could always depend on. A villain to fear, a villain to unify against, and a villain to conquer. See, Crusades turned into colonies. Colonies turned into civilizing missions. Civilizing missions turned into the war on terror that opened the way to the genocide in Palestine. And every chapter needed the same enemy. The irrational Arab, the violent Muslim, the enemy of progress. But here's the truth they tried to bury. Arabs and Muslims were not barbarians. They were authors of civilizations, empires of science, philosophy, art, and governance. But that story has been silenced and erased. We have a choice. We can play our assigned roles in this ancient script, the West as the savior and the East as a threat. Or we can write a new story, one that doesn't rely on fear to feel like power. Because the longest war the West has ever fought was never about land, oil, or religion. It was a war for the imagination. And the imagination is where every empire arises and where every empire falls. It is time we end this story that was never true to begin with.